Welcome back everybody, I'm Jaran Gerber, your host, and today I'm going to react to a video called The Company That Stole Anime from America, The Harmony Gold Story. Now for new updates and content you can visit the links in the description down below, and let's get started. Enjoy.
Identify yourself.
This is Rick Hunter, invitation number 201.
That's confirmed as an invitation from Lieutenant Commander Fokker.
Robotech.
Fantastic series.
There was a time when anime felt like a secret. If you were a kid in the mid-1980s, you didn't call it anime. You didn't know that word yet. You just knew that certain cartoons felt different, heavier, more dangerous somehow. The robots weren't selling toys. The heroes didn't always win. People died, and they stayed dead. And there was one show that seemed to carry all of that weight at once. You'd come home from school, you'd turn on the television, and for 30 minutes you'd watch something that treated you like you were old enough to understand loss and consequence.
Thanks, Rick. Nice shoot.
I can't move it fast enough, I'll never make it.
That show was called Robotech. It wasn't Japanese to you, it was just yours. It aired on American television, in English, with American voices. It belonged to Saturday afternoons and quiet living rooms and the strange feeling that cartoons could mean something more than you'd been told. What you didn't know, what almost nobody knew at the time, was that Robotech didn't really exist. It was a Frankenstein. 3 separate Japanese series, completely unrelated to each other, had been surgically grafted together by a small American company that had no animation studio, no creative track record in the medium, and no particular right to be making decisions about what these stories would become. Dialogue was rewritten from the ground up. Characters were renamed and declared to be relatives of people they'd never met in their original context. Entire storylines were invented whole cloth to make the pieces fit together, to explain why the animation styles shifted, why characters vanished and new ones appeared. The company that did this was called Harmony Gold. They weren't animators. They weren't storytellers in the traditional sense. They were businessmen who saw an opportunity in a legal gray zone, a gap between what American television regulations allowed and what the Japanese companies creating these shows had actually licensed away. And they built an empire inside it. They understood licensing, syndication, and adaptation the way someone might understand how to play the system if they spent enough time watching how it worked. For a brief window in American pop culture, that empire worked. It introduced a generation to something they'd never seen before. It created loyalty that lasted decades. But empires built on borrowed foundations don't last forever. The same instincts that allowed Harmony Gold to rise, the willingness to bend, adapt, and reshape material to fit American distribution models, would eventually turn the entire American anime industry against them. The very thing that made them successful became the reason everyone saw them as the problem.
You didn't come in until 4 this morning. You must have been partying too.
You jealous?
The rise. Why it worked. To understand what Harmony Gold accomplished, you have to understand what American television looked like in 1985, because it was a very different landscape than it seems now. Animation was considered children's programming, full stop. There was no negotiating that category. Networks measured success by toy sales. If a cartoon didn't drive retail, it didn't matter how many people watched it. Story arcs were actively discouraged because syndication required episodes to air in any order. You couldn't build a narrative that depended on viewers having seen last week's episode. Death was forbidden. Romance had to resolve neatly. Complexity was suspicious because it might confuse the target demographic. Into this landscape came a company with no animation studio, no creative legacy, and no particular expertise in the medium beyond understanding how to find and acquire things. What they had was access. They knew how to find material overseas and bring it home. Harmony Gold had been licensing foreign content for years, mostly live-action television programs from Asia and Europe. They weren't creators. They were facilitators. They understood how to acquire rights cheaply, adapt material quickly, and sell it to American broadcasters and distributors who didn't ask too many questions about where it came from or how thoroughly it had been altered. In the early 1980s, they acquired the American broadcast rights to 3 Japanese anime series: Super Dimension Fortress Macross, Super Dimension Cavalry Southern Cross, and Genesis Climber Mospeada. These were real shows. They had audiences in Japan. They had creative teams behind them. But none of them belonged to each other in any way. None of these shows were connected. They shared no characters, no storylines, no continuity, no shared universe. They were 3 completely separate products from 3 separate creators working at different companies in Japan. If you watched them back to back, you'd think they had no relationship to one another at all. But American syndication had a specific rule that governed everything that happened next. To sell a show into daily broadcast, the kind of slot that generated real money, you needed a minimum of 65 episodes. None of these series had that many individually. Macross had 36 episodes. Southern Cross had 23. Mospeada had 25. Together, they made 84, which was enough. Separately, each one was too short. So Harmony Gold made a decision that would define everything that followed. They combined all 3 into one show. New English scripts were written from scratch, completely replacing the original Japanese dialogue. Characters from different shows were suddenly declared to be relatives of each other, cousins, descendants, siblings across generations. A massive multi-generational war that had never existed in any of the original series was invented to explain why the animation styles kept shifting, why characters who died stayed dead, why the setting and tone kept changing. The result was Robotech. And against all odds, it worked. It worked not because it was perfectly executed, but because American audiences had never seen anything like it. The show had death. It had consequence. It had romance that didn't resolve cleanly or happily. It had characters who made choices and lived with the fallout for the rest of the series. It acknowledged that sometimes you lose. Sometimes you don't get the ending you want. Carl Macek, the producer who oversaw the adaptation, understood something important about his audience. American audiences weren't stupid. They weren't incapable of handling serialized drama or complex narratives. They'd just never been offered that in animated form. Cartoons were toys and merchandise. Cartoons were simple. Cartoons weren't serious. Robotech offered something different. It offered respect for the viewer, and a generation responded to that. Fan clubs formed. Merchandise sold, not because of the show's connection to toys, but because people cared about the characters and wanted to own pieces of that world. Novelizations were written that expanded the lore. For a few years in the late 1980s, Robotech was the most visible piece of Japanese animation in America. It was what people meant when they talked about anime, if they knew the word at all. But beneath the success, something unstable was forming. Harmony Gold didn't own what they were selling. They owned licenses, temporary permissions to broadcast and adapt specific material. And those licenses had limits that hadn't been seriously tested.
Let's hope this thing works like it's supposed to!
The peak, when it almost broke. By the early 1990s, Robotech had become a franchise with ambitions that extended far beyond the original television series. Harmony Gold wanted sequels. They wanted continuation. They wanted to build a universe that would rival anything American studios were producing. They wanted to turn a licensed adaptation into an original property. But this is where the architecture started to crack in ways that couldn't be ignored. The original Japanese creators, the actual studios and producers who had made Macross, Southern Cross, and Mospeada, had never agreed to a shared universe. They'd sold American broadcast rights for their individual shows to Harmony Gold. What they hadn't sold was their futures. What they hadn't sold was the right to prevent themselves from making new stories in their own universes. When Harmony Gold tried to produce new Robotech content, they discovered the walls of their own creation couldn't be extended without permissions they didn't have. New Japanese Macross productions were being made in Japan. sequels, films, entire new chapters of a story that had originated in the same source material Harmony Gold had licensed. The Japanese companies that owned these properties were creating new work, building new canon, expanding their stories. Harmony Gold believed their contracts gave them control over anything Macross related in America. The Japanese licensors, particularly Big West, which controlled the core Macross rights, disagreed. They believed their original license only covered what had been created before they sold the broadcast rights. What followed was a legal stalemate that would last for decades. It became the kind of dispute that lawyers love and creators hate. Harmony Gold blocked the American release of new Macross content. They argued that their license gave them exclusive control. Japanese licensors refused to grant additional permissions. They argued that Harmony Gold's license didn't extend to material that hadn't been created yet. Neither side would yield because neither side believed they were wrong. And caught in the middle was an American audience that had grown up with Robotech and now wanted more, only to discover that the franchise they loved was legally frozen. New Macross movies came to Japan. American fans learned about them online. They wanted to watch them, and the answer was always no. The peak of Harmony Gold's ambition wasn't a creative triumph. It was a standoff. They had built something that millions of people cared about deeply, but they couldn't move it forward. And they couldn't let anyone else touch it. It was theirs to hold, but not theirs to grow.
Wow, what were all those fireworks about?
I don't know. I better go check. Wait here. I'll see what's going on.
The fall. Structural, not personal. The fall of Harmony Gold wasn't dramatic. It was procedural. It happened slowly, then all at once. Throughout the 1990s and 2000s, the American anime industry evolved without them. New companies emerged that licensed content directly from Japanese studios with clearer agreements and better communication. Subtitled releases became standard instead of dubbed localization. Fans demanded authenticity. They wanted to experience the original vision, not an adapted interpretation. The very thing that had made Robotech possible, the willingness to alter, combine, and rebrand foreign content to fit American distribution models, became unacceptable to a new generation of viewers who had been raised on anime instead of discovering it by accident. They didn't want adaptation. They wanted the original. And Harmony Gold couldn't provide that. Their entire business model was built on transformation and combination, not preservation. They couldn't succeed in a market that valued fidelity. Worse, their legal stance toward Macross made them adversaries of the community they'd helped create. Every time a new Macross film or series was released in Japan, American fans would ask when they could see it. Every time, the answer was the same. You can't. Harmony Gold won't allow it. The company that had introduced a generation to anime was now blocking that same generation from seeing more of it. They were the gatekeepers preventing people from accessing the very source material that had inspired them. Legal actions compounded the problem. Harmony Gold pursued lawsuits against other companies they believed were infringing on their Robotech-related intellectual property. Some of these suits targeted productions with only superficial resemblance to their licensed material. The company became known not for what they created, but for what they prevented others from creating. The perception took hold, fairly or not, that Harmony Gold had become a gatekeeper more interested in control than creation. More interested in defending territory than in expanding it. Meanwhile, the Robotech franchise itself stalled. Sequel projects were announced and abandoned. Crowdfunding campaigns were launched and under-delivered. A promised live-action film spent years in development without materializing, becoming vapor instead of reality. The company held the rights to a beloved property, but couldn't seem to do anything meaningful with it. And slowly, quietly, the audience moved on.
Armor 2 is destroyed and Armor 10 is heavily damaged, sir.
I had hoped this moment wouldn't come in my lifetime.
The aftermath. What was lost? In 2021, after nearly 4 decades of legal conflict, a resolution finally came. Harmony Gold reached an agreement with Big West, the Japanese company that controlled the core Macross rights. It was a settlement born not of victory, but of exhaustion. Under the new terms, both parties could distribute their respective content worldwide.
Wow, I
The
didn't know
blockade
that.
that had stood for so long was finally lifted. New Macross productions could finally reach American audiences legally. The walls came down, but the victory felt hollow. An entire generation had grown up, grown older, and found other things to care about. The moment when Macross could have dominated American pop culture, the way anime would eventually dominate streaming platforms, television, and mainstream conversation, had already passed. The window had closed. Robotech remained a curiosity, a relic of a specific moment in adaptation history. Respected by those who remembered it from their childhood, unknown to those who didn't. It became a nostalgia object instead of a living franchise. The franchise that had once felt like the future of American animation became a cautionary tale about what happens when legal architecture outlasts creative momentum. When protection becomes prison. Harmony Gold still exists. They still hold their licenses. They still occasionally announce new projects, reboots, reimaginings, new continuities. But nothing gains real traction. Nothing becomes part of the conversation anymore. The company that introduced millions of Americans to the emotional possibilities of anime is no longer part of the conversation about anime's future. Their influence is historical now, not current. They were gatekeepers who stayed too long at the gate.
Mere Micronians couldn't possibly have captured a Robotech ship.
Maybe it crashed on their planet and they managed to salvage it.
Final beat, the lasting question. There's a version of this story where things went differently. A version where Harmony Gold becomes the foundation of the American anime industry. Where their early success leads to partnerships instead of lawsuits. Where the bridges they built stay open. But that's not what happened. What happened instead is that a company saw an opportunity, seized it brilliantly, and then spent the next 30 years defending territory instead of expanding it. They won the short game and lost the long one. They weren't villains. They were businessmen operating within the rules as they understood them, at a time when those rules were ambiguous and didn't have clear enforcement. But the rules changed, the industry evolved, audiences changed, and Harmony Gold didn't. The shock of seeing a character die and stay dead, who still remembers thinking that maybe cartoons could be something more than they'd been told they ever could be. That memory is real. That feeling was real. That impact was genuine. What's less certain is whether it belongs to Harmony Gold or to the Japanese creators whose work they borrowed, renamed, reorganized, and never fully gave back. Whose stories they told in a way those creators never intended, but in a way that introduced millions of people to what they'd made. The credit belongs to both, maybe. The fault does too.
So that was the company that stole anime from America, the Harmony Gold story. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Goodness me, I didn't even know all this was going on behind the scenes. And I'm so glad after all these years, in 2021, that Harmony Gold and Big West came to an agreement to release products on their respected brands. Seriously, I'm so glad about this. I mean, look at all the material that has been released over the years. We saw the Robotech movie, the animation from Carl Macek. We saw Robotech 2, which was actually the Sentinels. I wish there was a follow-up series called Robotech 2, but we never got it. And there was the Do You Remember Love movie and the Shadow Chronicles movie. That was also very good. And we also got non-related series like Macross 0, Macross Plus, Macross 1, Macross 7. I mean, that was so fantastic. There is sort of a link between the different animation cartoons, but non-related really to the main characters. And I must say, I didn't even know the 3 different cartoon series, the Macross Saga, the Southern Cross Saga, and the New Generation were owned by 3 different companies. I didn't even know that. That was a new revelation for me as well. Just to show you that I'm such a big Robotech fan, here's my own copy of the original soundtrack, the 20th anniversary of Robotech. And here's my own copy of the Robotech, the Shadow Chronicles soundtrack. It just comes to show you how much I love Robotech. There are more products that I will show you in later videos, but for now, those are the 2. And a word of wisdom for today. If you love cartoons and you've never watched Robotech, do yourself a favor. Start now. You will not be disappointed. Have a blessed day further, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.